40 years, I guess, Anthony. And I can tell, I've had some prepared speeches.
I was 10 when we met.
And I was 6. But we've seen a lot of things. And what I've always seen in Anthony is his attachment to our area, the attachment to our people, and the passion he feels for our region. And he has a progressive view and ideas about rural areas, rural Southwest Virginia, well experienced there. But Anthony is an advisor and has written a plan for candidates in rural areas in several states that they're using his ideas. So he's always been ahead of the curve. Anthony believes in asset-based community development. And that means looking at your assets in a place. Instead of saying, woe is me, identifying what the positives are and how to take those positives and build for our area from the bottom up. We know trickle down doesn't work. Anybody in here believe trickle down works? It doesn't. Bottom up works though, and Anthony has demonstrated it time and time again. You'll see Anthony just about anywhere in Southwest Virginia when you want to. Now there's this other fella, I think he has the job now, and I've been out talking to people, and they tell me he's missing in action. I mean, that's what people, who is he? He's missing in action. We never see him. Had a person today tell me, I don't think I've ever seen the man. Wouldn't know him if he walked in. Well, we know Anthony. His goal, and he will exceed it, I'm sure, is to have 100 town halls throughout Southwest Virginia. I remember when we couldn't get a town hall in our area from our present person when we were talking about the Affordable Care Act and other issues like that. Anthony, how many have you already done it?
This is the 36th.
This is our 36th town hall. Or Anthony. And it won't be his last time to be in Wise County, because with this many volunteers and people involved, we're going to have them all over Wise County. But we're aiming now for the primary. So, without further ado, our friend Anthony Flaccavento.
This is really spectacular. It's just very, very exciting. Thank you all for turning out. Thanks so much to Marilyn and Dylan and everybody else on the local volunteer core group that's made this happen. It doesn't just happen. It's made to happen. And we'll talk, the format from this moment forward will be, I'm going to speak very briefly, about 5 or 6 minutes, which is really brief for me. And then we're going to just have the town hall part, which is, it's just open discussion. Any concerns, any issues, any ideas, things you think, whether they're policy or practical ideas, whatever. And my lovely wife Laurel, who's back there, will also be recording the ideas when they come up. So we'll do that for a chunk of time, and then we'll shift gears, and Marilyn and her team will get up and talk a little bit about this core group and how it works and how these core groups are emerging all around the 9th District. So we'll talk a little bit about issues, we'll talk some about strategy, but really, this is so exciting to have such a great turnout here in Wise County. It really gives me heart. So I'll just briefly frame it. So as Marilyn says, I've been working for, this is the 33rd year I've been in Southwest Virginia. I started out in the little town of St. Paul, which we have a few St. Paul folks here, and St. Paul's got a lot going on. If you haven't been by lately, you ought to stop in. I lived in Dungannon for a period of time and then moved to Abingdon. And through that period of time, I've basically been doing two things. I've been farming it was about 5 years in when I started, but we've been farming for about 25 years. A small commercial, used to be a tobacco farm, now it's organic produce. And I've had a variety of different nonprofits and businesses, but all of them, including what I do now, have been focused on, as Marilyn was saying, this idea of building economies from the bottom up. I didn't used to call it that, but I got so sick and tired of trickle down being shoved down our throats, and I thought, I need a way to talk about something that's totally different. I thought, well, it's bottom up. That's what really works, because, as she said, trickle down don't. So throughout all of that, what I've found is we've had a lot of successes, and part of why I'm running is because I think there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of exciting, innovative things happening in the farm sector, in economics, in treatment of the opioid crisis, but it's simply not enough. There's not enough attention, there's not enough resources, and it's because fundamentally we're dealing with this incredibly uneven playing field across the board in so many respects. And I could, I'm sure, go on for a solid hour about all the different ways that the playing field is uneven for Southwest Virginia, uneven for rural communities, uneven for working people. But I'll just give you 3 or 4 examples. So let's start with one that's been going on for a good long time, organized labor. Wise County, Russell County, so many with such a strong history of organized labor with the UMWA, more recently the communication workers. And people wonder, why is it that more than half, well over half of American workers say they would prefer to work in a union business if they could, and yet private sector union is about 6%. So 53% want to work in unions and only 6%. Why is that? Well, if you listen to the pundits and the folks on the right, they would say, well, it's just the invisible hand of the market. Nonsense. What it is systematically we've been making it harder to form a union, harder to join a union, easier to penalize workers who try to form a union. One example is the fact that our law now allows, perfectly legal for a company on the one hand to prohibit people who want to form a union from sharing literature about the union, from posting things, from having discussions, except on their break time in a little break room. Totally relegated away from the normal day. And yet at the same time, it's perfectly legal for those same companies to put anti-union literature everywhere and anywhere, and to have direct conversations with employees to tell them why they shouldn't join a union, maybe with a little intimidation tied in. That's one example of how the playing field has gotten so uneven. So it's just flat out hard to form a union, join a union, and sustain a union. And of course, what right-to-work laws do is make it harder to keep a union going because they take much of the income flow away from it. That's one example. Another is just in the workplace generally. So, you know, a couple things about it. We know, for instance, that women who've made progress economically still only make about 78 cents on the dollar to men. And that's the same level of experience, same basic job. And that, some people say, well, 80%, that's not so bad. Well, what that means is if a man has a job and he's making $50,000, that same woman's going to be making $40,000. That's a lot of money. That's per year. That adds up over time. So that disparity is big. And why is it? Well, it's because we've gotten more lax about enforcing some of our workplace discrimination laws. And then along with that economic difference is the fact that we're all very aware now, and it's a good thing that at least we're aware, of just how widespread workplace sexual harassment, sexual abuses of women, right? I mean, it's been in the news a lot. So how is it that we didn't know about it for so long? How is it that people like Bill O'Reilly and the other celebrity abusers were able to hide it, but also in ordinary workplaces? Well, it's partly because of something called non-disclosure agreements, which used to be very rare. But now they've become utterly commonplace, where for an employee to take a job in so many different things, they have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And that basically means if the company's doing something bad, you can't tell. Right? That's what it means. So whether it's environmental abuse, whether it's discrimination, whether it's sexual harassment, that non-disclosure agreement ties your hands. And to violate it, to tell what actually happened, you put yourself at risk, any sort of monetary compensation or anything else. So we've seen that over and over. So that's a second way. Again, such an uneven playing field. These things just aren't the laws of nature. Third example is around what's happening with black lung. So I'm sure that many of you are aware that for years after the passage of the initial COLA Act of 1969, black lung rates, they went a little bit like this, but basically went on a steep downward trend. And so that by the end of the 1990s, although there was still plenty of black lung in the coal fields, the rates of new cases were getting pretty infrequent, relatively speaking. And then starting around 2000, they started to spike up, and now we're in the middle of a black lung epidemic, which is all the worse because miners who are much younger and have only been underground for 10, 12, 14 years can have advanced stage complicated black lung. Well, we think the reasons for that have something to do with the fact that the coal seams are much thinner, and so that in taking coal out, you're not only stirring up coal dust, but rock dust. There's a lot of reasons behind it, but here's what I want to focus on. in the first Obama administration, they started trying to address this issue. And they worked with the Department of Labor to change the standards on black lung. And it took a long time, and the Republicans, including our current representative, fought it at the time because it was tied in with the Affordable Care Act. But ultimately it was passed. And what basically happened is that, number one, the allowable levels of coal dust and rock dust were dropped to try to diminish this epidemic. And the second thing is that the burden of proof that a miner had to show to demonstrate that he had black lung was lessened. So in the past, the company could basically present unlimited counter evidence and just smother the miner in that evidence. And that changed as well. Two very modest but important changes. That only came into effect in the last 3 years because it took a long time to get it through. And what has the Trump administration done? Well, they've opened up that rule for public comment, looking to see if it can be made more efficient and cost-effective. Now that sounds to me like right-wing speak for how do we get rid of that rule that's protecting the health of miners, or at least water it down. So another way in which we have such an uneven playing field. And then the last one I'll mention, and then I'll tie it up, is around the economy. So as Marilyn said, I'm a bottom-up guy. And that doesn't mean that I'm opposed to big business at all. It just means that I want to see, again, a level playing field. So here's a couple of examples. We're looking at all the needs that some of the new manufacturers that are emerging in our district and other parts of Appalachia, or some innovations like hemp farming, which we're studying to see what the potential for hemp farming might be, both for farmers and for processing and for making medicinal compounds. Looking at all that, and what you find is there's a lot of interest and there's support from our universities, UVA-Wise, Virginia Tech, but money is always so tight. There always seems to be so little money to go around for the small business, the startup, the innovator like that. But why is money so tight? Is it because we don't have money in this country? No. We just passed a $1.5 trillion tax bill, and by most estimates, 80% of that is going to the top 1%, the biggest corporations. So that means when you do the math, about $1.2 trillion is going to go to these people who already are sitting on over $2 trillion in cash. Now, what kind of public policy, in what world, what universe does that make sense to give people who already have so much more when we're struggling to have broadband, we're struggling to straighten out a few of our roads, we're struggling to set up the other kinds of infrastructure that allow us to create new businesses and solve some of our problems, not to mention investing in drug courts and the various rehabilitation clinics that we need for the opioid crisis. So we think we're starved for money, but we keep giving more to folks who already have so much. When are we going to quit that? We've got to stop doing that. And so why I'm running is basically on the good news and bad news. The bad news is I think our policy is completely out of whack, completely out of touch with working people, especially working people in rural areas. I think it's doing great harm. We're sucking wealth out of communities instead of it trickling down. And it's being driven by this crazy policy of making the rich richer and the biggest companies bigger. I'm also running because I've been fortunate over my 3 decades here to see a lot of better alternatives. And I've not figured out how to solve all the problems, but I know from what's happening in the 9th, what's happening throughout Appalachia and actually all around the country, that just some amazingly smart, frugal, community-based initiatives to build stronger, more diverse economies, to solve our housing problems, to solve problems with mental health and other things are emerging around this country. They're just starved for money, not enough people know about them, and so we keep going back to the same old that hadn't been working for a good long time. I want to change that. I want to lift up these alternatives. I want to get them in the public debate and then get resources flowing to the best of them. And then I want to fight like crazy against this uneven playing field and this trickle-down nonsense. That's it. Thanks. So that's just real quick, kind of my platform in a nutshell. I will mention the materials out here. If you don't already have them, they have our website. Our website, you can get much more deeply into my stands on different issues. We haven't put everything up on the website, but we've covered a lot of them. We also have an open door policy, and we'll be talking soon about the core group. But now, let's take 10, 15, 20 minutes, how much however much time you want, to just, I want to hear from you. And we're just going to kind of list up some ideas, and every so often I'll respond a little bit, but mostly we just want to gather your ideas. As I said, this is our 36th town hall, so we have many, many sheets of newsprint that we've taken these ideas from, put them in a master list, and then we put the newsprint in the recycling pile. But the point is that we're maintaining all of these ideas, concerns, and issues, and we're kind of building a master list. And that's part of how I'm trying to become a better informed representative. So let's open it up. Hugh.
Your first election is going to be the primary.
Yeah.
Somebody's running against you, I assume.
Right.
And it seems to me, as revving up the base for that primary seems an important thing to do. And I would personally like to see more mention of other Democratic candidates like Senator Kane, a greater sense, because I assume that the person running against you, who seems to be very young, is going to be energizing students or something. And I think just strategically, it seems to me, when I see something about an independent-minded Democrat, that doesn't rev up my base as a Democrat, you know? And I just want you to, would appreciate you thinking about that question of which election you're dealing with. The other thing that what Marilyn said about the guy who's not here, whose name we shall not mention, but I have spent a lot of the past 40 years dealing with individual problems of poor people, as has Maryland. And one of the things that was good about the 9th District was not only Boucher, not only Wampler, but going back to Pat Jennings. Pat Jennings was before my time. Wampler wasn't, and Boucher certainly wasn't. We had offices in this area that did real constituent services. And my problem is, and I just talked to somebody yesterday who handles Social Security cases, SSI cases, and was talking about, she had a decision, she argued a case last fall that there has still been no decision. In the old days, when you had Wampler, who was a Republican before your time, but he was, you know, you could contact his office. And certainly if you contacted Rick Boucher, they were on their case. And it seems to me that you really, and I think I've mentioned this before, the constituent services part of what people think about Congress, what congressmen do is ingrained very heavily in this district. And yet, in your materials and the other stuff, I don't see much reference to it, any reference to it. And I feel that's a significant lack, because I think that's how people look to.
Right. So let me try to respond to both of those. So I agree with you on both counts. So in terms of the constituent services, I do actually talk about it a lot out on the campaign trail. What I talk about in more so, the language we use is more that I have been and will be, I think, a real representative, because I'm out with people. And I talk a lot about Morgan's absence. We talk a lot about him as an absentee.
I wasn't saying that you talk about Morgan's absence, but I wanted, instead of leveling the playing field, I would like you to say working hard for the working hard. Or, you know, just.
Well, you're going to have to work with our communication slogan committee, but we'll work on that.
Thank you, Hugh, because I know we've got a lot of questions here, so.
Okay.
And
I don't believe you're really running against Mr. Santo Pietro, are you?
well, so that's good. That's kind of getting to the first half of Hugh's question. So really, so we do have a primary. It is June 12th, and the other Democrat is Justin Santo Pietro. He's a young man from Blacksburg. He's about to turn 26. Smart guy, articulate guy. But he doesn't have any experience in the 9th District, in my sense of him. I'm not dissing him. He's just young. He's been to college and then went and worked in D.C. for a few years. So yes, on the one hand, we are running because we've had forums where we've been there and we're very aware of him as a contender. But basically from the get-go, we entered this race against Morgan Griffin. That's been our preoccupation. I will say this about the primary. We were looking at numbers. Now, we've not had a Democratic primary for Congress in many, many years, as we were saying earlier. So we don't really have anything to compare it with exactly, but when we look back at other non-presidential primary years, like when you're, like 2017, the gubernatorial race, the turnout has been unbelievably low, between 4 and 5% of registered voters. 4 and 5%. So a big emphasis, which we're just about to move into, starting in the middle of April, will be to double that turnout, which is still pretty pathetic, let's be honest. 10% of registered votes is not anything to get excited about, except it would be a huge increase. I hope we do way better, but that's our goal at the low end, is to have not only to win the primary, but to get a much bigger turnout than what people think, to win it decisively, and then to get wind at our back with that. And in the process of doing that, we will. I mean, one of the reasons I don't talk a whole lot about Tim Kaine is because he doesn't talk about me because he's waiting until the primary. So there's that whole holding back that they do, even though he and I are friends, and I'm sure we'll ultimately be working together. But he can't talk about me in that way. So that's part of it there. Others?
What commonalities and what differences do you see between this end of the district and, say, Blacksburg, the upper end? And what stands out in both directions, I guess?
Well, of course, the district goes way beyond Blacksburg and up into Allegheny County and Giles County in there, and then all the way down to Martinsville. Blacksburg's somewhat of an exception. Now, Montgomery County has many of the same problems of many of the rest of our counties. Parts of Montgomery County, like Reiner and Shawsville, and outside of Blacksburg and Christiansburg, they're struggling too. So there's a lot of commonality there. But the biggest difference, I guess, for Blacksburg per se, is that tech is just like a world unto itself. It's growing rapidly. It's adding programs. One person at a meeting I was at a few weeks ago described Blacksburg as a suburb of Virginia Tech. So Tech has such a kind of powerful influence, mostly for good, but not always, because they're driving up property values, they're making it harder for young families to set up shop there. So there's a number of things, but that's probably the biggest difference there, that and the proximity to the interstate. But when you move into Grayson County and Carroll and Patrick and over into Henry County, again, there's not coal as an issue, but outside of that, you have commonality on the opioid crisis, on just a general lack of access to good health care, or it being expensive in too many places. You have people underemployed. It's probably a bigger problem than unemployed, although there's plenty unemployed, but people working 2-3 jobs. It's very similar, even though the details are different.
Which counties do you think present the most challenging to pull out Democratic votes? Or have you even got, can you talk about that? Or?
I don't think we know that quite yet, but I'll say this. When we're looking, where we have the strongest turnouts in the town halls and the meet and greets that we're doing, which is maybe an indicator to some degree of turnout, because in these town halls, it is mostly the base, but also we're getting people who've never heard of me, never met me. They may think of themselves as an independent. So we're getting some of that in some of those as well. It's almost directly correlated with how strong the local core group is. So here in Wise with our first event, in Floyd, which is a low population county, but we had almost 100 at our first town hall. Same in Grayson County and Carroll County. So some of the counties which have not been for the last 10 years good for Democrats are really fired up, I guess is what I would say to that. And that's very exciting to me. From a point of view of winning the general election, we have to both do extremely well in Montgomery County and Radford, that kind of an area where the most votes are, Abingdon, but then we've got to do quite well most everywhere else. Some people don't realize there's a lot of votes in Tazewell County. So we've got a strong core group that's getting going there. Tazewell has the third highest vote total after Washington and Montgomery County. So there's certain places we're putting a little more energy because there are more people there to vote, and Tazewell County's not an easy one for me. So we're really spending a lot of time there as well. Yes?
Anthony, my name is Amy Brooks. People like to think of this part of Southwest Virginia as deep red. We heard in the national media that we're deep red here. But a fact that always sticks in my mind is that the 9th District was one of the only rural districts in the U.S. in 1980 to swing for Jimmy Carter over Ronald Reagan. And since then, I think we've all seen this kind of disinvestment in the Democratic Party in this part of America. And the people have followed suit and sort of disinvested in the Democratic Party. So my question for you is, when you think of a future that's blue in this part of Virginia again, what do you see? What is your vision for this part of Virginia?
Let me first say that I completely agree with you. I think that it's been kind of a chicken and egg, and when people hear, when folks like in Blacksburg say, why do those people in Wise and Dickinson County vote against their own interests? I say, well, you know, exactly who have they had to vote for that's in their interest, clearly, decisively in their interest. I'm not saying that the Democrats are the same as the Republicans by any means, but I'm saying that we have shifted, and too often it's not been clear that our candidates, top to bottom, have been strongly, decisively progressive candidates who will stand with working people, who will fight for working people. That, to me, has been the main, that plus a lack of a ground game, that plus a lack of putting people out in the trenches working has really what's cost the Democratic Party places like Southwest Virginia. For me, the vision is basically, again, that we shift our economic thinking away from waiting for the crumbs of trickle down to investing in the things that work, investing in whether it's land-based enterprises, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's downtown revitalization in some of the communities that's happening, whatever it is, it's a shift in thinking that we build, that the role of the federal government, in part, is to invest in a community's ability to help itself, solve its own problems, create its own prosperity, fix the difficult situations it has, that it's driven by the locality or the county or the region, but the federal government becomes a partner less with mandates and more with investment so that we can build our own prosperity. That's my experience, limited as it is, that's what we've done. We've created things, we've started things, then we've gotten a little bit of public investment, and then they grew out of that. So that's what I'd like to see. And that, of course, includes schools, it includes, you know, all of that. Yes, sir?
You mentioned the low voter turnout in off-year elections.
Yeah.
I think maybe the most important thing that a political group can put forward to voters is, what am I going to do for you? Or in other words, the voters, and what's in it for me? Why should I go ahead and vote for him? And I think having a real, clear, strong message is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Democrats fell on their face in 2016. There wasn't a clear message of what we were going to do for people.
Right.
And, you know, we lost a close election as a result.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. I had a little piece that came out about 4 days, as it turned out, before the 2016 election in Huffington Post, and it was titled "Losing Liberal Language." And I didn't intend it to be, you know, predicting that we were going to lose. I was just kind of talking about it. And what it was that, you know, when particular problems arose, it was the planned merger of AT&T and Time Warner. And when Hillary Clinton was asked about that, she had a very long, vague answer about, well, we'll have to study it and see what both parties, and we'll have to look at all sides and make sure it was that kind of an answer. Trump, who, you know, is the serial liar that he is, but what Trump said was, I won't allow it, it concentrates too much power in the hands of too few people. And I thought, why didn't the Democrats say that? What is up with that the Democratic candidate had this long, vague answer that nobody could quite understand, and this guy had the right answer? So anyway, I agree with you. I think we have to be as direct, as plain, as clear as possible, which I try to be. So thank you. Yes?
I have maybe a comment and maybe a two-part question. I'm happy to see you addressing the opioid crisis. What are you going to do about, I love drug court, what are you going to do about building a better mental health care system? And also, residential rehab. I have opioid addiction in my family. Everybody's okay now, but they have care. And we've tried many things. and residential rehab seems to be the only thing, in my experience, that works. And the other question is, for those folks who have been addicted to opioids, and that perhaps young people have gotten themselves into trouble and gotten some charge or conviction on their record that is never going to go away and is going to keep them from getting a good job, what are you gonna do about that?
Yeah, that's, the second one is a huge problem, and that solution in terms of removing that stigma that keeps them. So there's a number of things about that. One is it's been going on in Virginia for a while, the so-called ban the box, where when you're applying for a job, you no longer have this box that says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? So that's something that states are tackling, but it also could be tackled at the federal level. At least at the federal level could push the states in that direction. So I think absolutely, it's this absurd thing that on the one hand, we criticize people who get into trouble when they're young and then say they never become productive and we're willing to lock them up and throw away the key, but when they try to rehabilitate themselves and re-enter the workforce, they have all these obstacles. It's almost impossible. So that's not a complex problem. It's a simple solution to this, and we need to focus on things like banning the box there and other steps. In terms of the residential treatment, everywhere I've gone, that's what I've heard. We have so few beds available to people with drug addiction. Some people can work through it without a residential treatment center, but clearly we need several facilities in different parts of the 9th District where we have little or nothing. And again, it's a question of, do we spend money now to help people become productive members of the community, having jobs, being back in their family, or do we keep spinning our wheels in a way that ultimately is way more expensive for the families, the community, and the economy as a whole? We should be basically building rehab facilities for people, residential facilities. And there should be several of them in the 9th. I can't tell you how many, but we shouldn't have to go from here to Salem, or you shouldn't have to cross the entire district. We ought to be pretty easily accessible.
And pharmaceuticals should pay for those.
And pharmaceuticals should absolutely pay. Yeah, that's another uneven there, where people who have just happened to have an opioid problem are being put in jail, but the pharmaceutical companies that pushed it out there and denied the science of addiction, they're skating. Absolutely. Yes?
I'm seeing a trend, especially on Facebook, social media, of where the other side are making fun of our youth because they're concerned about going to school and the violence and the guns. And I want to know how are you going to address the issue of gun control?
So my position on gun control is that I'm a gun owner. We have a farm. I'm a gun owner. I say I'm fooled around with hunting, but I'm not really a hunter. I basically have a gun for groundhog control. But
I'm talking about.
I know. I'm getting there. So I believe in the Second Amendment, and I believe that people should be able to own guns, and I wouldn't ever try to contradict that. And at the same time, I absolutely think we should long ago have cleaned up and improved our background check system so it was truly universal. That's one small step. It's not expensive. It's not that difficult. We know where the gaps and the loopholes and the places where things aren't connected are. We should be fixing that immediately. Second thing is that, and there was movement here, I'm not sure if it was passed, but we should overturn the prohibition on federal money spent on studying the causes of violence and gun violence. That's been in place for 22 years. It was absurd when it went into place. We should get rid of it so we can give the CDC and other federal agencies the ability to really study this. And the third thing is we've got to rein in the firepower. Again, that's where people start getting antsy, but the fact of the matter is it's impossible to imagine the founders being able to imagine what is now available. And something around 75% of the population, 70 to 75%, supports some control on bump stocks, semi-automatics, et cetera, and I would fight for all that. Now, on top of that, I think for the schools themselves, it's just mind-boggling to think that kids going through school now have to have active shooter drills and metal detectors and all of that. But I think in addition to protecting kids in these other ways, we need to be investing more in mental health. And we need to be looking at, and this is something that I don't know exactly how you do it as a government, but we at least ought to have a conversation as a country as to why so many young men have so much rage. mostly young white men, as a matter of fact. But why do so many young men have so much rage, and what can we do about it? Because that's clearly, it's not always mental illness per se, but it's somebody who's pissed off and feels justified in taking a horrific action. There's got to be some way to figure out why that's become so common in our country.
It starts in childhood.
Yeah, and a lot of it then gets to the lack of good schools and support and everything else. Yeah.
I'm responding to the woman who said something about not being able to do a job when you get out of jail. The state of Kentucky has changed it so that you can expunge your record. So that in Kentucky, that time in being in prison is taken off the record. My son in Oklahoma had this problem, and he didn't even know how it happened, but his record was expunged.
So it can be done, for sure, yeah.
It seems that it's on a state level, a vote about expunge or don't expunge.
I think that's true, yes, right. So in the back and then up here and here.
Set of issues that, at the heart of which is Citizens United. We're seeing a tremendous amount of money pouring into American politics. I don't think most people are aware of where that money's coming from. The Koch brothers. I'm old enough to remember when David Koch ran against Ronald Reagan because Reagan wasn't
too liberal.
conservative enough. He comes out of the John Birch Society. When I was in public school, the John Birch Society was held up as a fascist threat to this country. Now it's mainstream. That is a national issue, the money and the ability of people like the Koch brothers and the Mercers to influence American politics. I think it needs to be an issue because your opponent is getting some of that money.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, he gets about 70% of his funding from PACs,
Yes.
mostly corporate PACs, yeah.
And it is a threat to democracy.
Yeah, so it's one of those crazy issues where across the political spectrum, you have very high levels of people, Republicans and Democrats, saying money in politics is ruining our system, and the role of lobbyists is out of control. This recent banking bill is another example of how lobbyists changed something that started out as a good bill. So what can we do about it? Citizens United, unfortunately, my understanding, not being a lawyer, but having read about it a little bit, was not an anomaly. It wasn't something out of character. It was the latest in a series of federal and Supreme Court decisions that keep giving corporations more rights of personhood. It was just the culmination of it, and of equating unlimited expenditure of money with the same as unlimited free speech. So those were the two pieces of it. If you can spend $1 billion to buy media time, that's all well and good because that's exercising your free speech. So overturning that, a couple of things. One is, I think there's people working for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and to state very clearly and unequivocally that only human beings can have personhood. While corporations do have to have some rights, of course, they can't have the rights of personhood. That could be done through a constitutional amendment, or it could be done through a piece of legislation, which I would certainly willingly fight for. If we passed a law, if we could turn Congress and pass a law that basically overturns Citizens United, it would surely immediately be challenged and probably end up in a Supreme Court that's likely to overturn it, is the problem with that. So I would fight for that, but I think there's things we can do even while we're fighting against a Supreme Court that wants it the way it is. And one of them is we can reinvigorate publicly funded elections. There's no reason why we can't have a system where a candidate who demonstrates some level of viability through petitions or polls or something or else cannot get public funding. It would be actually a relatively tiny, tiny part of the federal budget to fund congressional candidates across the board. It's a lot of money in politics, but when you compare it to our federal budget, it wouldn't take much, especially if it was a matching thing. So if a guy like me is getting all these small donations and you get a match, a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 match. So that's one step I'd like to see us do while we're fighting Citizens United and the others. The second is with lobbyists. It's terrible. I can tell you, as somebody who spends 3-4 hours a day on the phone trying to raise money to get enough money to get elected, it's a dreadful thing. When you go to Congress, what do? You spend 4 or 5 hours a day on the phone raising money instead of doing the people's business. That's what they all do. It's ridiculous. It's dreadful. It's foolish. But to change that, again, I think we've got to get this public funding. And then the second piece is we've got to get the lobbyists out of the legislative process. They're the ones that write the bills. That's why the bills always end up being good for the rich and powerful, because they write the bills. So why, as at least a step in that direction, let's pass legislation that says an elected official, congressman or senator, and his or her staff, senior staff, cannot take a job with an industry or a business that was in any way under their jurisdiction or regulation when they were running for at least 5 years. If you broke that cycle and you said, if I leave office in 2028, I cannot take a job with any firm or their lobbying arm that my office in any way had some sort of regulatory or oversight relationship. That would at least make a dent in that revolving door that has become just totally destructive of our process. So I know there were some hands up here. I think you wanted to go.
I have, I guess, 2 topics. As a physician, I'm also concerned about the gun safety issue. And the word safety, we often don't hear, but
Right.
In fact, I brought some resources. You may well be aware of them, but Scientific American in October had a wonderful review of over 30 studies in gun safety. Currently in America, if you have guns at home, you're more at danger of dying from a gun than you are if you don't. Now, there's a lot of safe gun owners and there are a lot of unsafe gun owners, and currently gun deaths are currently 60% suicides.
Yep.
So mental health and guns are an issue with survival. And currently, if we continue to add guns to American society, we know one thing for sure: there'll be more gun deaths every year, and it will never end. Right now, the NRA, of course, is a gun marketing organization, nothing more, nothing less, and their job is to sell as many guns as possible. I'm tired of hearing the falsely proven arguments about, protection from a gun and so on. And I think it's time that in debates we have evidence-based discussions, and we need to break the cycle where they've distorted some of these studies. And of course, you're right, the NRA lobbied to get the CDC not to be able to study gun safety issues, because the first studies that came out were showing the problem with guns. And of course, they tried to call that pseudoscience. So that's a big issue with guns. The second thing is their identity in this area. We've got to move to the next economy. And of course, I think we foolishly held on to coal. There's still some people waiting for coal to come back and save us. But I think most people are beginning to understand that coal is not coming back. Metallurgical coal maybe, but steam coal not, because BTUs are available from natural gas and other sources and the renewables. So we need to look at the next economy. And what you said is really good. A lot of people have looked at tourism, but tourism traditionally has low-paying wages.
Right.
It's not really helped in Pigeon Forge or the Gatlinburg area. There was a group down in Chattanooga and Hamilton, Tennessee, you're probably familiar with that, and they tried to get industry in, but they found that they didn't have the workforce. So they learned from the industry what they needed, and they tried to generate a workforce that was ready. Of course, that was a bigger area, more resources. We here have a problem with trained workers now. Most of our skilled workers have moved on. A lot of the others have opioid problems and came past their drug test. We know that to build an industrial base, you need to have a good workforce. You need to have an environment to attract industry. That involves health care, education, and a healthy workforce. And if you looked at the health of our current citizens here, we are, I think, second from the bottom in counties in the state of Virginia. So we've got a big challenge, but we don't even have a vision about where we need to go or what we need to do, and that's shame on us. But these are big issues, I think, and the future is not going to be very good until we can address these issues and have a good look at ourselves and maybe some input from other people that give us an extra eye. So I just wondered your comments regarding that particular problem and how we get out of the morass we're in.
Yeah, well, again, when it comes back down to me, there's a lot of stuff we have to grapple with, right? But it's kind of two things. One is I think that a lot of communities in the region, not just Southwest Virginia, but Southern West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, are beginning to recognize the fact that, yes, metallurgical coal will continue to be mined for some time. It'll continue to have a small but steady stream of good paying jobs, but steam coal is not going to ever be competitive again. And so compared to 2012 when I ran, there seems to me in Dickinson and Buchanan and Wise and Russell counties a much more broad recognition that it's time now to move on to get other jobs. And so that's an opening. I worked a lot on trying to create alternatives for tobacco farmers, and I can tell you that although coal and coal counties, it's different in the details, it was very similar in that those last 10 or 12 years, as tobacco was going out, as the quotas were shrinking rapidly, as farmers were struggling to make money at it, and the end of the federal program was on the horizon, most of the kind of conventional ag agencies and support, they just had one line, which was nothing can replace tobacco. That's all they said, was nothing can replace tobacco. And I guess they wanted to carry that line right up to the day that the federal program ended. So we started working on creating those alternatives, and some of them worked. Some of them worked on some pretty significant scale. That's my vision for the coal counties, is we should have started 20 years ago, but let's catch up, invest heavily in the things that seem to be working, that seem to have real promise. Let's look at the kinds of businesses that have real economic potential, like, for instance, energy efficiency. Energy efficiency in our buildings, energy efficiency in our appliances. There's things that we can make, there's things we can retrofit. Energy efficiency should be big business, because whether the source of heating and cooling is coal or gas or oil or anything else, it always makes sense to have less coming in and less going out. And so energy efficiency puts people to work, and there's places around Appalachia that have made that a focus and are creating a lot of decent jobs. So I'm totally with you. I think that opportunity for a vision for something new is finally here. I think that opportunity is here now, and I think it's been hard to make that case before. Okay, Kathy, I know you go. I'm sorry, it's hard to know who's next. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out, Solar in 2017 employed 3 times the numbers of workers that was employed in the coal industry.
Right.
So, we're thinking bottom up, but also thinking about a lot of other issues, but we're thinking bottom up economy. That is absolutely an area that is inflation. And we know that. And I know we all know all the different component parts of how we come together.
Right. And it was almost sort of political suicide to suggest wind or solar as economic alternatives, even if you talked about jobs 6 years ago. And I don't think that's the case anymore. For some people, that would still be a dirty word. But again, you've got coal companies in Eastern Kentucky putting solar panels on old strip jobs. I mean, I don't know if that's poetic justice or what that is, I don't know, but the fact is that couldn't have happened a few years ago. So I think starting to focus on what would it take to retrain some of our miners to be making some of the component parts of solar PVC or wind turbine or other emerging energies or energy efficient buildings. I think that's all part of it. I know you've had your hand up for a while, and then Dylan, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you had ever been to one of, this kind of goes along with the healthcare business, have you ever been to one of the RAM clinics here? And seen, that's a great concern to me about folks not having health care other than having to go once a year to go to a clinic like that.
I mean, it's so, I've been to RAM a couple of times, and on the one hand, it's a marvel. I mean, it's an amazing thing.
Not to down it by any means, it's
that's
wonderful,
pulled
but
together. And
my concern is the health care.
That we have to have.
Right, but the fact that we're still doing it after all these years, and that's the only access to health care, to dental care, to other things that some people have is just absurd. Right. So it ought to be, the goal ought to be not to keep having more RAM clinics and making them bigger. It ought to be, let's give ourselves 5 years and let's not need RAM anymore. And how do we do that? We expand Medicaid. We go for a Medicare for all, universal single payer system. We know we need to move there. I think, again, the time is right to begin to really talk seriously about a universal Medicare for all type system.
Right.
So, right. Dylan, you've had your hand up for a while. You've been patient.
We've talked about how in our government, in our system, we do have the resources. We just sometimes disagree on where they are being put.
Right.
And I think one of the places that really suffers, I'm sure a lot of us can understand, is education. and especially in this area, we have one of our community colleges, Mountain Empire, that is really struggling to keep the doors open and keep students willing to stay in this area. And we also have a lot of the local high schools having to consolidate to keep their doors open and to keep admissions up.
Right.
So what can we do for the local map of community colleges, and high schools to be able to keep them running and running efficiently?
Again, we have to decide that in terms of public schools, K through 12, we've got a system that is ultimately based on how well-to-do the locality is. That's really what determines whether or not your school is good. And I don't know why in so many other parts of our life we think that all Americans should be treated fairly and have the same break, but when it comes to education, we've sort of resigned ourselves to a system of a rich community is going to have great schools and a poor community is going to have struggling schools. I think that it's long past time for the federal government to be investing in that gap in funding. And hopefully the economic revitalization that I talk about a lot, that I think is possible, will build a stronger tax base to contribute to not only stabilizing schools but better teacher salaries. But that ain't going to happen overnight. And I think in the meantime, whether it's the Wise County schools, whether it's Lee County, whatever, I think it's tremendously well spent federal dollars to bring those schools, the teacher salaries, the facilities themselves, the needed technology up to a first-rate level. When you think of all the social problems, all the costly social problems that a good education tends to reduce. It doesn't fix everything for everybody, but a good education helps young people get on the path to better employment, to better relationships, to mental health, et cetera, we ought to be investing those public dollars in it. And I would push for that. So move away from these absurd federal education programs that are all about competitions among schools to win big grants, to do specific things so they're competing against each other based on test scores, and simply start investing resources so teachers can teach, so you can keep good qualified teachers, et cetera. I think that's what we need to do K through 12. It's the way we've been going about it through Democratic and Republican administrations has been cockeyed. It's foolish. In terms of community college and the universities, I favor free community college for all, for everybody who absolutely needs it that way. And I also favor that we pass a bill for four-year education. It's known under the acronym the PAY Act, pay as you earn, so that when students go to school and take on whatever level of debt they do, when they get out, their repayment is based on 10% of their income after a certain threshold of income to be able to meet basic expenses. So if you get out and you get a job with a big engineering firm and you're making $100 grand, well, you're going to pay your loan off pretty quick. But if you're struggling and you're piecing together a living for the first few years, you're going to pay very modestly. You're not going to tax yourself because you're going to have that threshold and then just 10%. I think that could help address student debt, because right now more and more young people are thinking between a soft job market and the unbelievably high debt students are taking on. They're questioning whether or not it's worth going to college. So I think those things would really help in that. You know, it's interesting, the $1.2 trillion that went to the top in this tax bill is almost identical to the total of student debt. It's $1.3 trillion. So again, somehow we thought it was okay to give $1.2 trillion to the very wealthy when we could have wiped all the student debt off that and freed up a lot of other economic activity in the process if that's what our priorities were. Yes?
Speaking of education, I just want to say this young man came all the way from Blacksburg.
Oh, wow. Great. I hope I didn't diss Blacksburg. Go ahead.
Yes. One of my big concerns is maintaining some of the gains that we realized under previous administrations, specifically in two areas. One is in LGBTQ issues. It seems that it's becoming acceptable, more and more acceptable again, to bash people. I'm getting off Facebook, so I'm not seeing all that crap on there anymore, but I'm sure it's still there.
Yep.
And I know that our young people are facing this in schools in the form of bullying, in both L-High and in colleges. People have to deal with the whatever's dished out. And it's not about being a snowflake either. It's about human dignity.
Right.
So I'd like to see how we want to, maintain that. The other thing is a very, very, very hot issue, abortion.
Mhm.
One of the things I've observed is that there are, what seems to me a significant number of people who would be progressives except for that one issue.
It's true. Yeah.
And
We're kind of economic progressives, or at least have some economic progressive
well, and
tendencies.
social in other ways. I mean, you can be anti-death penalty and anti-abortion at the same time. You don't have to do that dichotomy thing. But I think we need to reframe our goals in that area. I mean, the most powerful way to decrease the number of abortions that we have is available birth control.
Right.
And sex education that includes that, how to use that birth control. And yet that has been framed as like, we're the devil himself
Right.
on that issue. And one of the worst moments in the debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was when he said, Hillary Clinton is gonna make it okay for you to have an abortion up to 1 day before your due date. And I'm like, Hillary didn't say anything. She did not answer that. It was the stupidest thing he ever said, which is pretty, saying a lot. That's called inducing labor. That's not an abortion when you do that. And yet she didn't step up and say, Donald, did you have high school biology? That's not an abortion. We've got to take the bull by the horns on that issue. And we need to bring into the progressive fold people who might not be abortion on demand people.
Right.
Not many people want to criminalize it again.
Right.
Most people don't want to go there.
Well, at some state levels, though, they're certainly moving rapidly in that direction, for sure, some state legislation. Whether or not the people do, yeah. So real quickly on both of those, I mean, I'm a complete and strong supporter of LGBTQ rights across the board. I supported marriage equality, which was a big issue, actually, in 2012 when I ran. I came out in favor of it about 2 months before Barack Obama did, but I didn't get the press coverage that he did. But it's beyond just that. Of course, it's workplace discrimination, and I think this kind of warfare against people who are different, that's been the product of one of the products of the extreme right for a while. It starts to enable all those kinds of things: bullying, discrimination, et cetera. So we have to just fight that tooth and nail. I mean, we're going backwards in so many ways. Prison reform, incarceration policies under Jeff Sessions. I mean, it's an onslaught of bad stuff, all of which has to be fought. In terms of abortion, you kind of pretty much pulled my platform on it. My focus is on reducing the number of abortions through safe and affordable birth control, through better economic opportunities for girls and women, through better availability of childcare for those who've just had children and lower income working moms. I mean, it's a whole range of both economic and economic support, along with sex education and birth control. We know those things work. We know that that's a practical way to bring down the abortion rate substantially while still preserving a woman's right to choose, and that's what I focus on. Now that is an argument that some people can hear if they also feel like I'm their guy on their bread and butter issues. For some people, abortion is simply the defining issue, and if you're in any way not anti-abortion or pro-choice, you can't win their vote. And I accept that, and I acknowledge that.
I'd like to throw in a statistic, just to support that. Real fast, and I apologize, I can't cite the source of this, so you'll have to take it for what it's worth. But it was a reputable source. But I read that 8% of Democrats would consider voting for an anti-choice, pro-life candidate if they had a good, progressive, interesting platform. 39% of Republicans in today's political climate would consider voting for a pro-choice candidate if they had a sensible platform that they could support. So it's not the deal breaker we think it is for a lot of people.
That's interesting. So what I'd like to do is get one more comment from somebody who's not spoken, and then, because it's already almost 4:30, I really don't want to miss this opportunity with all these people here to talk about how we need you and how Marilyn and her crew are going to mobilize you so that we win the primary and the general election. So I do want to shift gears, but you go ahead and wind us up.
I was just going to tag on to what Elizabeth was saying, that we have a very religious population, or at least people who claim to be. I don't think that sounded right, but at any rate, that the abortion issue has gotten to be the moral platform. How could that ever happen, that it got to be the moral platform? We Democrats need to stress that there's a whole different level of morality that is not being addressed in the current administration.
Yeah, and I mean, the only good news there is that there does seem to be some cracks in the foundation of support for Trump from the evangelical community. Not big enough, not soon enough, but there does seem to be some of that. But the statistic you cite, if I could verify that's kind of what I'm banking on, is that there is a group of people that would be willing to. Well, that might be a national statistic, might be a little different in the 9, but that's good to hear. So let's do this shift if we can. I'm sure there's other comments and questions. I really appreciate this. This kind of dialogue is very helpful. Again, we take all these back. But I want to shift gears.
And they can go to your website
Yep.
and ask all kinds of questions
Yep.
and have you address
And I
them.
get people sending me questions through the
Ideas
website all the
and,
time.
yeah.
Absolutely. So when we launched this campaign, first of all, I started 6 months earlier than I had in 2012 because I knew I had to. And I also knew that in a district that has 22 counties and 4 independent cities, that there was no way that a small staff could energize enough people. And so we came up with this idea of individual core groups in every county. Some places we may combine them when the population is really small, like we might combine Bland with Tazewell. But generally speaking, we are aiming for about 20 to 22 volunteer core groups, one of which is Wise County and Norton, which got underway basically in February, I think is when we launched. And just to frame it, and then I'll turn it over to Marilyn, what the core groups do is they mobilize people throughout their community, the towns, the county, so that we can reach the base, so we can reach Democrats, energize Democrats, so we can reach young people, if there's a university or community college in the area, but also, especially as we move after the primary, to reach people who are independents and moderate Republicans, because I cannot win strictly on Democrats, even if we do a great job turning out the Democrats. I have to have some independents and moderate Republicans. The core groups are helping that by setting up these town halls, by doing letters to the editor, by helping extend our social media, many, many different things, all of which take people. So if I can turn it over to Marilyn and she can describe what they're doing so far and what the needs are.
Well, let's hear it from I didn't realize how large a crowd we had till I stood back up and opened that up back there. Well, how exciting today is and how exciting this campaign is. And I want to say to everybody here, I have a sense of hope and a sense of optimism that I haven't felt in a long time. And I think the time is right, and I think people are coming together, and people are getting involved and being asked to get involved as never before. In Wise County, we do have a core committee that got started back in Anthony, and as Anthony said, it's happening all over the 9th Congressional District. And our point was building up to today. And I want to tell you, I want to identify who some of the committee members are. And I just happen to be the one up here speaking, but every one of these people is playing and continues to play a key role. Many of you know, Ray Moore, want to thank Pat Baumgarten, Preston Mitchell, Grace Bradshaw, and Vicki Williams, who, in addition to everything, prepared these wonderful refreshments today. So let's hear it for them. And we hope that you'll enjoy them. Julia Winston, Larry Tapper, Melissa Reifert, Donna Porterfield, and I'm going to call on Donna in just a little bit because we're getting ready to do our phone banking. And that's going to be our first official act as our committee here. Judy Miller, Ruby Greer, Ann Newland, Betsy Grossman, Marla Weitzman, and Marla is also sponsor of the Young Democrats out at UVA Wise. But I also want to introduce y'all to my 2 best friends. Stand up, the 2 of y'all. This is Dylan Mabe, and he's president of the Young Dems out at UVA Wise. Michael Adams, and he's the vice president out there. And they came early and set up this whole room. They are now my top consultants. I do not know what in the world to do, and I'm so looking forward to working with y'all as we move forward.
Well, thank
and
you
I
so
think,
much.
and they both have already given us great ideas about how to use social media, how to get the postcards out, how to get people to vote, and they played a key role in the last Democratic election we had with Alicia Callan. And they really got young people involved like never before and other people. So this is our future right here. So thank you guys. Appreciate it. Betsy Grossman, Dirk Wiley, Fred Brooks, and then Amy Brooks is our social media person, and she's working with Pat Baumgartner. So you want to say anything about our Facebook page, Amy?
Yes, please. You'll see a lot of your faces if you find the group. But we have a fantastic, very active Facebook group. Each county is County 4, number 4, Flack. So if you look up the group Wise County 4 Flack, you'll find it. You can join the group. You'll get automatic approval. It's a real nice social hub. You can join. You can ask questions that we can forward to, and that'll connect you to Flack 4 Congress, which is the main Facebook group y'all want to be a part of, and there are all sorts of goodies for you there. So please make sure to follow us on Facebook.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I want to tell you about the committee structure that we have. We're set up into 5 committees, and they're not siloed like this. People are moving back and forth across wherever their interests are. But as we move forward, we have our letters to the editor. We have fundraising, which is going to be so critical. As you heard from Anthony, his opponent's going to raise much more money, 70% of it, from 2 or 3 PACs probably. Not talking about this, but in the larger election. So our fundraising is going to have to be grassroots. It's going to have to be each and every one of us contributing and asking our friends. And we're going to be having house parties. And I think, we have some tie-ins there. We're going to be having anything we can think of. So we need to build up our fundraising committee and really get that going. We have an events committee. And we do have an event coming up in June that we're going to be collaborating with Scott County for Flack, and we'll get out more details about that. Excuse me, my voice is going. And then our outreach committee. So we have the representatives of that today. I hope that everybody signed in. Did everybody sign in? And if you don't want us to follow up with you, you can take your name off, but we're going to follow up with everybody here. We hope you will consider, and we think that you will, to join this larger Wise County volunteer effort for Flaccavento. Now, the first thing we're doing is we're getting geared up for the primary, and that will be on June 12th. See, I was paying attention, wasn't I?
You were.
Okay,
I'm proud
good.
of you.
June 12th. And so we're going to be doing what's called phone banking. And Donna Porterfield has graciously agreed to chair that committee. And come on up, Donna, and I think we've got an event, a training event coming up that you can tell us about and kind of tell us what it is.
Okay, we're going to have a phone banking training actually here in this building, I don't know which room, on Friday the 13th of April. Because this is when we could get the representative from the Abington office to come here and do a workshop with us on phone banking. I don't like to talk on the phone that much. I don't call people. I have to do it at work, so I'm not a big phone person. But let me tell you, I volunteered to do this kind of job for a presidential election where we were just calling Democrats. And I dreaded it. I had to get myself up for it. I went in the first time, and when I made the first call, it was just great. And I made the second one, and it was even better. And I got in these wonderful conversations with people. And so it isn't an awful thing, you know, it's fun. You get to talk to people in the county you don't know, and they tell you all sorts of things, but most of all, we get to get people out to vote. And, you know, if they don't have a ride, see if we can get them, you know, some way that we can get them to vote, get them to the polls if we need to. So, come to the phone banking workshop on Friday the 13th of April, and right here.
What time is it on?
It's, oh, well, that would be a good thing. It's at 6 o'clock in the evening, so people can attend who are at work. And there will be refreshments. I'm making them myself. And,
She's good.
I very much enjoy cooking. So at 6 o'clock, you'll probably be hungry. We'll have some food here. So
And that's the training. Now Donna, and I guess we'll hear at the training, but who will we be calling? How will we know who to call?
we will have a list.
Okay.
And of course, there'll be Democrats, and we will have a list.
Some of you have met my field director, Brooke Costigan, who's a very, very sharp and delightful young gal from Marion, and she'll be leading the training. She does what they call cutting the turf, which means both for calling and canvassing, figuring out the people that you need to call. What you'll start with is the people who are the strongest Dems historically, the people who consistently vote Democrat and who consistently turn out to vote. And that will be the first kind of layer, and it is to make sure they know there's a primary, to make sure they know when it is, to make sure they know who I am, and you'll gather a little information about whether they've heard of me and what they think and all that, but mostly it's that group. And then as you move through the next couple of months, it'll move towards people who are less strong Dems and eventually getting to people who are kind of in the middle, but that's who you'll start with. Yeah.
So I hope to see a lot of you at the workshop.
And we will send out an announcement of it, and if you've left your email address so we can get that definite information to you. I think that's about it. We have you here if you would like to volunteer in the campaign, and we have these different ways to volunteer. If you would like to express that today, you know, we will have our chair, like Ray Moore, I think, is one of our chairs. We're just all meshed together. We're all doing each other's jobs. So, but what we need is people, and we need each of you to contact people, and we will be in contact with you, and we'll let you know of the training events. In the meantime, we've decided that one of the key things would be to start getting Anthony's name out there and name recognition. So we have the bumper things out front, bumper stickers out front. And I've actually put a bumper sticker on my car for the first time. I always used to work where I couldn't, you know, and then after that I didn't choose to, but so it's a big deal for me. And I have my bumper sticker on, and I saw a lot of bumper stickers out there, but we hope you'll leave here with a bumper sticker, put it on your car, because it's amazing the number of people that have said something to me and wanting to know just because of that bumper sticker. We also have yard signs. You saw them coming up there, and you noticed them, didn't you? Well, we need to start going with the momentum, building momentum, get the name recognition out there. Then we'll do the phone banking. At the same time, we have that joint event coming up. We want to be able to have town halls in other towns in Wise County. So we've got a good cross-section of all of our towns here. We need to follow up. We all need to get together and plan something similar in your community, and we'll work that out with Anthony and his campaign. We'll have these larger events, as we said. We've heard from Mr. Brown about voter registration and how to do it. We need to be doing that now. Think of your friends. Think of your neighbors. Think who you can get involved. Think of all the people that have just, in so many ways, are saying enough is enough. So the time is now. You know, the time is now. I think we have, Dylan and I were talking, I think we have an opening now. I think the times are ready. And I don't want to go to my grave thinking that I didn't do everything I could to turn the tide. So I want everybody, we have an outstanding, excellent candidate who expresses what so many of us are feeling and have been led not to say out loud for so long. So it's time to get moving and get going and sign up and volunteer. And that's all I have to say. Any of the committee have anything to say?
Go Flaccavento!